Hey everyone, it's the holiday season. As you know, at Addressing Gettysburg, we like to give you one free full Patreon episode per week from the previous year. During the month of December, you're going to hear episodes that our patrons said were their favorites. And we hope that you realize that there's a lot of work that goes into bringing Gettysburg to you, and maybe, one of your New Year's resolutions will be to support Addressing Gettysburg by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. But whether you do or not, we appreciate your listens all year long, and we look forward to bringing the history of Gettysburg and the Civil War to you through the year of 2025. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and from our family here at Addressing Gettysburg to yours, we wish you a happy, healthy, and food-filled holiday and a prosperous new year. Enjoy this episode from patreon.com/addressinggettysburg.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios,
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we have with us John Michael Priest, author of many books, but one of his Gettysburg books is Stand to It and Give Them Hell, Gettysburg as the Soldiers Experienced It from Cemetery Ridge to Little Round Top, July 2nd, 1863. John, welcome to Addressing Gettysburg.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So this book, now just so the audience knows, typically, as you know, we'll do a book interview based on a chapter in the book. But there was a little bit of a mix-up on our part here, and we didn't let John know that we needed a copy of the book, and that's my fault. That's nobody else's. I should have been a little bit more communicative with Dave. But regardless, we're going to wing something anyway. We're going to talk more about the process, because this is a unique book. I hear a lot of good things about it, and somebody was telling me last week that it's interesting because you're using mostly soldier accounts. You're not retelling the story of the Battle of Gettysburg. I mean, you are in the sense where it gives the reader context for what quotes they're going to read. But for the most part, you are you're letting them tell the story. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I don't deal much with generals unless they get in the way.
Okay.
Or they actually do something that someone remembers.
So, in other words, if a private writes about a general walking by and saying or doing something.
Right. Yeah. Like there's an account in there about a fellow named Bullard with, I think, a New Jersey regiment who was with Sickles when Sickles got hit. Okay. Or Longstreet's orderly, a fellow named Youngblood, who wrote about items on the field and mentioned Longstreet, for instance, walking across the field in Kershaw's attack. Mm-hmm. So then, yes.
Okay, but you're not really caring too much about their perspective.
Well, not really, because they've got a totally different perspective. Mm-hmm. The official records had to be approved from the top down.
Right.
So sometimes the timing that the men write about isn't right, or that the generals write about isn't, and they can broad brush a lot of things. Like at the Battle of White Oak Swamp, the 20th New York, a German regiment, United Turners, hit with one artillery shell, ran. And General Baldy Smith wrote, "They behaved as well as could be expected under the circumstances." So the men and the officers, particularly enlisted men, have very little to lose by telling the truth.
Sure.
And even though they're writing, some of them, most of the literature, years later, it's because the memories, they either forgot what happened and don't write about it, or won't talk about it, or they're writing about it because they can't forget it.
They're haunted by it.
Yes.
Also, they can't write about too much either. And if they do, you know that they're either repeating something they heard from someone else, or embellishing, or just completely full of shit. For example, like, I'm a private. I'm one man in a line of thousands of men, right? There's smoke all over the battlefield. There's bushes, trees, buildings, fences, hills obscuring my view of everything, distance. And so it's I'm not going to be able to tell you if I'm fighting down by on Devil's Den, I'm not going to be able to tell you what's going on the Emmitsburg Road north of the peach orchard,
Right.
Because I can't see it, and frankly, I don't care to see it because I'm worried about what's in front of me right now.
Exactly.
So it's a very what's the word? Is it myopic view of things?
Yeah, it's kind of narrow.
Narrow, yeah.
What they pay attention to are the bushes, the rocks, the fences. What they can't see, they pay attention to the fellow next to them.
Mm-hmm.
He might get hit and they might not even know it, or they'll hear something and they can tell by the snap what type of bone it is that got broken. It's a very intimate thing with them. They remember generals, usually, if they're close enough to them. But, they have to be narrowly focused. And that's true with any soldier.
Sure.
If like during Nam, if you're in a foxhole, spread out, or World War II, you only know what's going on in front of you.
Right. And you can't be wasting your time looking around and seeing what's going on elsewhere either. You have to worry about what's in front of you.
Right. And so that's what they remember. It's not that the officers are wrong. It's the different experience. But again, you can only make private so many times. So what are you going to lose by telling the truth? Mm-hmm. And if you lie, someone's going to pick it up.
Yeah.
They wrote for a military audience, their comrades, and they assume that the reader knows what they're talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
So a person has to know their tactics. They have to know what the commands meant. They have to realize that someone might be able to charge, but only 6 guys heard it. So when the guys take off, the men follow them because, they're going somewhere.
Right.
I mean, really, that's how it happens. Or you got horses that knew the bugle calls better than the men, particularly in the artillery and cavalry, and they'd respond to it, even though if it wasn't theirs. I mean, you get these little things going on. So they remember, for the most part, what specifically went on around them. And the trick is finding where these pieces fit into the narrative, into the puzzle. Maybe not 100% right, but the idea, you have to understand what they went through because they shaped the country after the war.
Yeah.
The same way the World War II veterans shaped those for us baby boomers. The same way the vets of Nam, still fighting the wars, many of them, shaped it when they raised. It always has a ripple effect.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But when you talk about it, talk about the way they did things and explain it on the ground level, veterans of other combats can relate to it. And they can understand, you mean they weren't standing up? No. So that's how I do that. We
were talking before we started recording, and you were talking about how any chance they'd find something to hide behind,
right?
If they could. And we tend to not think of Civil War soldiers that way. And maybe in the beginning of the war, and for most of the war, perhaps they were in line and everything like that. But there are certainly situations where they had the liberty to not hold formation and could get behind a rock or a tree or whatever they could, of course.
Well, yeah, and an example, for instance, at Antietam, the reason there were so many casualties is there was a heavy ground fog, high humidity, smoke hung on the ground. They walked into each other at close range.
Couldn't see. And that's an important thing, and I try to stress this whenever it comes up on the show. There's a book I read called The Environmental History of the Civil War. Have you read that book?
No, I haven't.
It came out a few years ago. And it's very good because it makes it first of all, it strips the romance away from warfare and army life and all that stuff. It's mostly about feces and disease and other things, just how the body breaks down when it's starving, things like that. But how the environment shaped the way the soldiers lived, the decisions the generals made, and then also how our armies, learned to manipulate the environment to their benefit, with, removing hills or, whatever the hell it may be.
All through history, okay. Revolutionary War, the British stopped using linear tactics in wooded areas.
We did, or the British?
The British.
The British did?
Yeah,
Okay.
but you don't hear that, because
No.
they're Brits that got to go in formation.
Right.
In the in Revolutionary War, when von Steuben came over, he said Americans make excellent soldiers, but you got to explain to them why they're doing what they're doing.
Right. We want to know why.
So Americans are very different in the sense that they often will think on their feet.
Yeah.
At Antietam, at the Sunken Road, the Bloody Lane, William French's division did not send out skirmishers. Why? No one knows, and you're never going to find out probably. But the first two lines, actually being Green Regiment, went in, climbed over a fence, and walked into fire. The third line coming up had three veteran regiments in it, meaning they'd been in one or two fights maybe. Mm-hmm. They hit the ground and laid down behind the fence.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because it was stupid to stand up.
Yes. And then being veteran, they knew better.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's how they learned. The thing is, we tend to romanticize this conflict way too much.
I agree.
There's no romance in it.
No.
It's like one guy said, "You mean you tell this guy that his grandfather ran during Pickett's charge?" Yes.
Yeah, that's something I don't understand is first of all, grandfather maybe, but probably great grandfather. And you never met him. I guarantee you never met your great grandfather. You might have heard stories about him, and there's that like family pride and all that stuff, which is nice. But that doesn't mean because you don't want to hear that your great grandfather might have wanted to live. I see. I don't think if you step off. Let's say we're talking about Pickett's charge, and you step off and you get 2, 3, maybe 500 yards out. And then you see that, no, this is too hot, and I've been around long enough to know where this is going to go. I'm going to go back.
Right.
I don't think that's cowardly.
No.
I think it's cowardly to not step off. I think it's cowardly to be about to step off, and everybody steps off, and you go the other way at a run. But if you at least made the effort, you're not a coward.
Well, the interesting thing about it is that veterans wouldn't necessarily call them coward if they couldn't go in.
Okay. Because they all probably at one point or another.
There's at least one account from Antietam at Burnside Bridge where the Union soldier froze. Mm-hmm. He couldn't move. Mm-hmm. His friends picked him up and laid him alongside the bridge. I mean, really, they weren't upset over it.
Right. Because they understand.
There were men, who, for instance, at Gettysburg, the sergeant major of the 2nd Wisconsin, I think it was, went and told another fellow, I'm going to get killed. And the sergeant, his friend said, well, you don't have to go in. Sergeant majors don't matter that much.
Right.
But he did. Yeah. And he got killed. So they were a little bit more understanding about it. The romanticism that comes in after the war was basically to soften the after effects on the civilians that didn't go in.
Okay.
But, Pickett, there's a great thing with Pickett talking with Lee after the fight, that one in the movie with, General Lee, I have no division. Well, Longstreet's orderly, Youngblood, saw that. And, apparently, Pickett rode along the front of Spangler's Woods below the crest, found Longstreet in the hollow, and repeated the same thing. And Longstreet turned to him and said, don't worry, George. You'll find most of your men in a half hour or so. So what happened, right?
Yeah.
We're too easy to call it cowardice because we're not the ones that know what they're facing. We're not the ones that are going to get shot.
Right. It's easy from this distance to think someone a coward for doing something that most of us couldn't do once. And this is the how manyth time these guys have been asked to go and do these things.
And it wasn't uncommon for soldiers, like at Cold Harbor, a regiment of the 6th Corps veteran threw itself on the ground and let the new guys go over the top of them because they weren't going in.
Yeah.
And again, we misused the word hero.
I agree.
Heroes happen by accident.
Yep. They don't get a salary.
Yeah, you lead a charge and there's no one behind you, but it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah. So they get a salary.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, you're right. A hero, it does something without thought at the last minute that saves someone or does some good for other people.
Right.
And you don't wake up in the morning and go, today I'm going to find an opportunity to be a hero. Well, you don't do that.
No, the adrenaline takes over.
Yeah.
And that's why very often when it was over, men would just break down, shaking or crying. You hear very few accounts of that, but there are accounts of it.
Mm-hmm.
They just didn't know how to deal with it.
No. But back to your point about the mist and the smoke and the humidity, I think, and again, and me bringing up the environmental history of the Civil War, and everybody in the audience probably knows this enough by now. You've heard it over and over again, but it bears repeating that anything, whether it's your backyard barbecue or the Battle of Gettysburg and everything in between, the elements are a vital part of how that plays out, or if it plays out.
Right.
Like you could look at the Mud March. It sounds like, oh, good, we're going to march down and cross it. Yeah, but then it rains, and then the roads become a quagmire. Then what? You can't just do it as easily as you thought.
Exactly.
So humidity, people go, you could chew the air, but they don't realize that. Well, yeah, you kind of can chew the air. It is thick with moisture, and it changes everything. It changes the way sound moves. It changes the way light moves. It changes the way what you can see. It distorts what you can see if it's really hot and you're looking at the blacktop with those waves coming off. So nature has a huge role in all this stuff, but it never really gets mentioned. And I think it does us all a disservice, especially the people who fought these battles, for us to not take that into consideration or not have an author point that out,
For instance, Kemper's Brigade on July 3rd.
Yeah.
The men were laying in extremely tall grass and high humidity.
Yeah.
There are accounts of men standing up and the minorly cool air hitting them. Sunstroke.
Yep.
They're on the ground.
Yep.
They're useless.
Yeah. Same with Garnett's Brigade. A lot of those guys didn't even get up when the order came. They couldn't.
Right.
So, yeah, that's a huge factor that people don't take into account. They do when they're walking around the battlefield in their, synthetic fiber T-shirts and shorts, and they're still wafting themselves with air, going, oh, it's so hot, and they're barely exerting themselves. But they don't take that experience as a tourist in modern day and kind of apply it to what these guys might have gone through, laying in that open field covered in wool, out in the sun for how many hours before the order to get up comes. Yeah. And I think I always try to do that. I always try to take, what am I feeling right now? Or let me imagine what it felt like for a guy in this situation. And I go, man, I'm glad I don't have to go through that.
But it's a situation that has been shared throughout history by soldiers.
Yeah, absolutely. And worse.
And that never changes.
No.
That never changes.
No.
It's
a you know what else is amazing to me, and this occurs to me more as so I'm 45. I'll be 45 in June. And ever since I hit 40, just everything I'm becoming more analytical about my own life and myself and life in general and all this stuff. And I don't remember what it was, but I was watching some war movie the other day, and it was a particularly brutal scene. It was the remake of All Quiet on the Western Front.
I haven't seen that yet.
Okay, well, so if don't go into watching it with the mindset of it being anything like the old movie or the book.
Right.
Just take it as forget the title. Just call it something else.
Yeah.
Germans in the trenches or whatever you want to call it, but don't think of it that way. And I think you'll enjoy it. But I will warn you, it is the most brutal war movie I've seen since Saving Private Ryan.
Yep.
I mean, the special effect, the whole thing, I loved it. I thought it was a great film. But there's a scene in it where, two soldiers from the opposing sides find themselves in a shell crater, and they get into hand-to-hand combat, and the German bests the Frenchman, and he stabs him, I believe. I can't remember. Yeah. And it's a ferocious, animalistic, a very primal hand-to-hand fight until he gets the Frenchman, and then he kind of backs away into his corner of the crater, so to speak, and he's kind of huffing and puffing, just kind of regaining himself, and the guy, the Frenchman's suffering, and he's making these noises, and so he goes back over to him and grabs mud and just puts it in his mouth to shut him up. And I'm thinking, my God, like, just the guy's dying. Like, you just have some humanity here. And then the humanity hits him afterwards. And then I think he tries to revive him and get the dirt out. I can't remember play by play because it was so disturbing. I tried not to remember it. But
that's one of the most disturbing parts of the book.
Yeah. Too. Okay. So that's part of the book. I can't remember the book. I read it in college and I don't remember anything about it. But I'm watching that and I realize this is a kid doing this to a kid. These are 20-somethings, right? Barely out of boyhood, no life experience whatsoever to know. Me as a 45-year-old, the last thing I would want to do is plunge a knife into this kid. I would try to, disarm him as best I could or, stop him from attacking me the best I could. I've never been in that situation, so God knows really what I would do. But the way I think now, I would like to think that I would do everything I can to avoid him. I just want to, everything I can to kill him. I would try to avoid. I would do everything I could to subdue him until we could, all calm down. Of course, that's not realistic, but still, my point is, as a 21-year-old, I wouldn't have thought that way. As a 45-year-old, I think that way. But as a 21-year-old, I would have probably if I were in that situation, all things the same, and I'm in that situation, I probably would have gleefully plunged that knife into him because that bastard's trying to kill me. And how doesn't he know who I am? Like, don't you dare try to kill me. The world needs me. It doesn't need you. Well, but now I'm like, it needs us both.
You find evidences when you really get into it and read the accounts and some of the regimentals. For instance, there was a guy on the first day, 76 New York, and the guy next to him got shot, and he thought, you're going to die anyway, so he left him. Then he heard a fellow that owned him money got shot, and he tried to go over and get the money from the guy.
Oh, Jesus.
And got preoccupied and couldn't because they were losing men so fast. You have that. You have one fellow in Kershaw's brigade when they're going across the field to attack the Rose Farm. He was found just covered with blood. And the officer shook him and, are you dead? No. It was his friend who was standing next to him that he was wearing. Because he got hit by a shell.
Oh.
Now, these guys are talking about it because they have to.
Yeah.
They have to. They had to be they had to be cold. They had to know when you don't waste time on a person. because that's what it is.
Yeah.
And you got to understand, the average combat was only 15 minutes to 20 minutes.
Right, right.
They were not these prolonged fights. They even called them firefights.
Mm-hmm.
The term firefight, was around in 1861.
Mm-hmm.
I found evidence of it. And you figure if you got 40 rounds, if you can fire at least one shot every 45 seconds, you'll probably blow away most of your ammunition in 20 minutes.
Right.
And they weren't getting resupplied.
No.
So, you know, when you look at these factors, these actions are so quick. But to the men, they're much longer.
Oh, yeah.
Because it plays out in slow motion.
Yeah.
Your
perception changes. That adrenaline changes your perception of things.
Yes.
Yeah. I've noticed that in when there's a particularly stressful moment, you think it's an eternity, and then you look at the clock and it's been 5 minutes, and you go, how is that even possible?
I know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could imagine that. It feels like an eternity.
And that like in regard to time, there's this long-standing argument that you can't rely on their watches.
Yeah.
Armies, ever since they had pocket watches, ran by time.
Sure.
But
was there a standard? I mean, how would they keep it?
Almanacs.
Okay. Almanacs.
Yeah.
Explain, please.
The almanacs had the time settings.
Okay.
Okay, when sunrise was. And,
I see what you're saying.
Noon.
So you look and you see the sunrise and you go, it's 7:15, and then you synchronize your watch.
Right.
Okay.
For instance, at South Mountain, McClellan ordered a 4:30 assault at all three gaps.
Mm-hmm.
To do that, the watches had to be accurate.
Sure. Okay.
Now, when it comes out in a report, it might be a little bit different because, we've had time to think. But all your adjutants had to have accurate watches because of getting the buglers and the drummers up for reveille and all that. They had to be synchronized.
Okay. So then the discrepancy with times, then I'm going to guess then is that when we're reading an account from a private, maybe most privates weren't walking around with watches.
A lot of them did have them, but
okay.
Well, for instance, Pitzer's Woods, traditional story, it was at noon.
Mm-hmm.
It's based on two accounts, one of which was Hiram Berdan, who I would never trust with any accuracy.
Okay. Unless he was firing a gun.
The Confederates said in their accounts it was around 9 o'clock. The 3rd Maine said something similar, but out on the skirmish line was the 4th Maine under, I think it was Walker, Colonel Walker. He pulled out his watch when the firing started and said it was 9:30.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's not a big action, especially with the breech-loading rifles of the Berdans. They're blowing away their ammunition. And they took on a Confederate brigade, which was, a little offhanded. By 10 o'clock, Sickles had sent out a detachment from the 40th New York to tear down all the fences between the Trossel Farm and the Emmitsburg Road, based on the reports that came out of that.
Okay.
When the veterans are writing about it in New York at Gettysburg, they're saying, the time really wasn't all that important because they never tried to figure it out.
Right, sure.
The fun thing about doing research is chasing down the rabbit holes. And you find out, that couldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm. And also, I'd imagine in an army life, especially during a battle, most people, maybe certain ones, officers particularly, or just people who have this mindset, but most people are not checking their watches every 5 minutes to see what time it is, or every hour to see what time it is. You got too much to do. You got too much to worry about, and time doesn't really matter at that point.
It does for historians because we're nitpickers.
No, I'm saying, but to them at that moment,
well, the neat thing is you'll often hear when the guy hears shooting, he looks at his watch.
Yeah.
You hear that.
Yeah. But not everybody.
Not everybody
thought
but
that
the
way.
ones that did, the times are remarkably close.
Mm-hmm. But think about today. There's a crime that's committed out in public, and there's all these people that see it, right? And you ask them later, well, about what time would you say this happened? I don't know, 10:30. I don't know, like maybe 10ish.
Right.
I don't know. It was maybe 11:15. You know, you get a whole bunch of answers, and they're roughly in the same area.
Right. So
but
it's an approximation.
Yeah, because most people aren't.
Right.
They don't have the foresight when they witness, like, just because I watched a documentary about it, it's fresh in my mind, so I'll say it. The Boston bombing, right? People that if you're near that and it goes off, you're not. Oh wow! Wait, let me check my watch, honey. Okay, yeah, it's
No, they're not.
They're not doing that,
Right.
So, then you have to, and now, of course, the Boston bombing is a lot easier for us to figure out the time because we have video of it and it's all time-stamped. But, back in the Civil War, a battle's like a huge crime scene and everybody's a witness to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the problem is getting all these fractured accounts.
Yeah. And you're like a
piecing them
detective.
together, and then taking a look at it, if you're on the ground, which you should be, about where could he have seen that. Mm-hmm. You can get an approximation. The times on the battles, they are at best approximations, give or take 5 or 10 minutes. But when you get an adjutant at Antietam saying it was 9:30 and my watch was 5 minutes fast that day, there are some people that they are so regimented. It's like teachers. I still hear bells, but that's because I got probably hit once too often. But, you get this internal clock.
Yeah, sure.
You're out in the field, a farmer. You can look at the sun and tell what time it is.
Uh-huh. Yes. Actually, where we are recording now is also the office of a bicycle tour company, which I started back in 2005. And I often liken my ability to read the weather and the elements to that of a Native American out on the plains or something like that. I could smell when it was going to rain if I wasn't seeing it coming, and people are like, well, what do you think it's going to do? Is it going to rain later? And then I'll get a vantage point where I could look out over the mountains and I'll tell you what weather's coming. And I'm like, no, I think we're okay for at least till tonight.
Yeah.
So... if you're out in the elements, and that was the other thing, is I know where the sun is in the sky in relation to this location. And so I'm able to gauge what time it is when I'm elsewhere based on the position of the sun. And I'm within an hour, let's say.
You'd be surprised. In construction work, I was in construction.
Yeah, that's another one.
I could tell, because I know how to read a watch, but I could tell by the position of the sun. It's around 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
11 o'clock, 12 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Even in biblical times, they could do that because they say at the 7th hour of this day.
Right. Yes.
We've always kept track of time.
Of course. We need to, for some reason.
The thing is, very often, we want to be so precise. And that started, believe it or not, I really think that started with the historians like Ezra Carman and John Batchelder, whose times ended up on the markers on the field. And what's remarkable about that, a lot of those times agree with what the soldiers wrote.
Okay.
Not always the ORs.
Okay, interesting. Huh. Okay.
And then if you get the rate of march, you can pretty well time, like Herbst Woods, around 10:15. And you can actually almost figure out the time at a regular step if that's what they're doing, how long it took them to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. And that's pretty neat, is being able to figure that stuff out without the precise things that we're used to today, There's another thing about time I wanted to ask you. Oh, no, it wasn't about time. But earlier you said that, if you're writing a book, you should go out on the field, to go out on the ground and stuff. And you said, and you actually said as an aside, which you should do. I mean, that makes sense to me. I hear a lot of authors say that. Is that something that if someone was writing their first book about, let's say, the Battle of Gettysburg, and they're living in, I don't know, Nevada, would you be like, well, you better make sure you can get out here, spend a good deal of time?
I've heard, and again, can't verify that. One of the authors on one of the early, very popular books on Antietam, not Reverend Schilt, but closer to when mine came out, he never visited the field.
Oh, really?
You should do your own research too.
Yeah. Don't just use secondary sources.
Right, and maps are flat.
Yes, that's a good point.
I mean, at Antietam, for instance, they finally got the center of the field in Park Hands, and they put a trail out there that on a regular tour, I don't get a chance to go on. I went on it 5 days ago, and looking at the ground, I can tell you exactly where the infantry were lying and why in the maps it's represented by an angle.
Okay. Why?
Why? The ridge.
The shape of the ridge.
Yeah, there was a ridge that ran this way, and then lower, a ridge that went into a valley, and up a ridge, another ridge. Not very steep. Didn't have to be.
Right, no. But that's the point.
And they had their own artillery firing over them, so it was it was better to be there than on the hill.
Right. So it's almost vital. It sounds to me like you're saying, to you at least, it's vital to get out there and walk the ground and examine it closely with the eye of a private in mind,
or an officer, or you're going to place your line.
Okay, yeah. So everybody. I mean, that makes sense to me. That sounds absolutely like that's something you just have to do. Yeah.
But it takes years of experience to
realize that.
Yeah, I mean, when in 1989, when my Antietam book came out, the park didn't own the West Woods.
Okay.
They didn't own most of the East Woods. They didn't own everything from basically the Smoketown Road, which is right outside the Visitor Center, north.
Yeah.
And if you went out there, you were on private land. And it was really interesting because one day I did go through the West Woods and unbelievable briars. But now that they have it, it makes it easier to interpret. And it does affect the interpretation.
Sure.
Nothing is ever static in history.
No.
And most of the times when you discover something, it's not a matter that you did a lousy job. It's a matter you might not have had that material. You might not have had that access. So that changes. It's not a matter of poor scholarship. It's a matter of what is available.
Yeah. Right. And so what do you do, like, for this book, Stand to It and Give Them Hell? Where do you find these? Because it's a lot of firsthand accounts. Okay.
Well, before the internet, you went to Carlisle to the War College.
Okay.
Now the U.S. Army Military History Institute. History Education Center, excuse me. The Institute was the old one. You go to every little public library you can find. They've got stuff in file cabinets. They have no idea what's in there.
Okay, so you just go searching through file cabinets.
It's root, hog, and die.
Yeah, okay. So there's a lot of patience, it sounds like. You need to have a lot of patience.
Well, your family does. I mean, that's when you had to go to Duke and Chapel Hill. And my daughter's sleeping at the table snoring while I'm looking up stuff. But now with the internet, what's remarkable, there's a lot of excellent material out there, primary sources that are digitized.
Yes.
And you're allowed to use them. So, it's fine. Go to the park, like go to the Battlefield Park here, to their library, get permission to use it, of course. You have to make an appointment. And go through all their files and photocopy the daylights out of it. I usually take paper along to give them in exchange for what I wipe out of theirs. And then take it home and sort it out. Same thing with any of those institutions. So it's fascinating what is available. And there's some remarkable stuff online, like Spared and Shared, which has Civil War letters.
Spared and Shared?
Spared and Shared. It's a great site.
Okay.
I think John Banks runs it. I'm not sure. Excellent site. There's just so much. You have to be willing to dig. Build a library.
Yes.
Like, for instance, on archive.org, there are tons of primary sources on there, regimental histories and all, that you can download.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the public domain.
Yep.
So you can download, something like New York at Gettysburg, I'm pretty sure. And it doesn't cost you a fortune.
Hattie Trust, I think, is another one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, we are lucky to be living in this day and age of easy access to information. You would think it would have made us all smarter as a society, but it's actually worked the other way. You have all this information at your fingertips, and everybody's coming out dumb.
Well, that's an educational matter.
Yeah. It's outside of the scope of this episode.
Well, no, that's okay. It's the sidetracking. It's like the old TV show Connections.
Uh-huh.
I love that because he'd stray like Mark Twain and start going all over the place, but it was all connected.
But then pull back into what he started at. Yeah, that's an art.
And that's the thing. As Americans, despite what everyone says, we've never really trusted people who were too educated.
No, we don't.
I mean,
why do you think that is?
Well, a lot of it has to do with this idea that we're all grassroots. Ichabod Crane.
Yes.
Well, Washington Irving, yeah?
Yeah.
And the Knickerbocker Tales. I hate that man.
Who, Washington Irving or Ichabod Crane?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Because Ichabod Crane is a stereotype that people latch on to.
Yeah, of a teacher.
We as a nation, we sometimes associate being intellectual with being a bookworm, slightly British. We associate it with aristocracy.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yes. They're an elite. They're
right.
elitists.
And you look at our heroes.
Yeah.
David Crockett.
Yeah. Nobody, just worked his way up.
Right.
Average man.
At least in his own mind, too.
Abraham Lincoln.
Lincoln.
Yeah.
But they neglect the fact that Lincoln was a railroad lawyer before the war.
Yeah.
He was rich.
Yeah.
Why? You don't marry into the Southern upper class.
As a poor boy.
If you're a dirt farmer.
Yeah. But I think what people, or at least for me, what I admire about Lincoln is that he went from this poor kid,
man,
educated himself, basically became a lawyer. That's what impressed. Not that he became president, that he became a lawyer after being a barefoot, dirt floor, cabin living boy. Yeah.
See, that one of the biggest things that the country tends not to value is reading.
I know, which is sad.
Reading.
Yeah.
Reading is freedom.
Absolute education. True education is freedom.
But that's how you educate yourself, too.
Yeah.
You ever think of how much you've learned since you left high school?
More than I've learned more in the 5 years since I left college, which was 20 years ago. But I learned more in those 5 years than I did in all my years being in school.
Exactly.
And that's what I don't understand about our education system is, I understand the value of some of that. I understand the value of making well-rounded citizens. But there isn't really much. They're teaching you how to fall in line. They're not teaching you how to think and be your own person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who was it, Dewey? Who was the guy that had a great education?
The great what?
The one that, that's the Dewey Decimal System. Wrong Dewey. But really, schools had been used, particularly as
was it
the
Hearst?
systems evolved.
Was it Hearst that you're thinking of? One of those big tycoon guys, right, who changed the education system?
I don't know which one. It's a shame because that tells you about my education course.
But go ahead. One of those guys a long time ago said,
schools were used to educate workers.
Right. Right.
So, where we've gone now is the idea that everyone is supposed to go to college. No.
I agree.
But the idea of educating workers is to get people that will toe the line.
Mm-hmm.
So you teach government, you teach English, you teach the 3 R's, all of which are misspelled. And
That's a great point.
And education really, education beyond the grade schools was not really practical at first.
Yeah.
But then once we start labor laws that keep kids out of work, you got to put them somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early 1900s, we invent the teenager with all his angst.
Yep.
When in reality, a lot of them probably would have been on their own anyway, working somewhere or doing things illegal. We created this thing that a formal education and a basic education, and it's all arguing about, well, those other kids in other countries are smarter than ours. Well, that's because not everyone in other countries goes to public school.
Right. Right.
A lot of them go into the military, go other ways.
Well,
They're
and
divided.
also some of those other countries actually want their people to be ahead of everybody else, which we used to want. Mm-hmm. We used to want our people to be the best, but we don't want that anymore. We I don't know what the word is, but what is going on you're retired now, right? I'm assuming. Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to say, because the way schools are now is not an education, and I'm not even sure if when I was in school, it was fully an education.
Right. Yeah.
The one
strain
thing
a bit, I know, but
yeah. Well, one thing we were taught was critical thinking, which is not taught now, and you take it for granted having been taught it, and I totally forgot that it was something taught to me. I thought I was just always that way.
We were never taught that it was critical thinking. We were just told, find out for yourself.
Yes. I'd raise my hand and I would say, I remember this one specifically because I got in trouble with the principal, and I don't remember what it was that happened, but the principal gave me a demerit. This was at a Catholic school. Gave me a demerit.
I know.
You know the pain.
11 out of 12 years.
So she gave me a demerit for misrepresenting the principal. I guess I know what it was. I had gotten in trouble for making fun of somebody or something like that, and I'd taken to the principal's office, and I went back to the person and I said, "Hey, what'd you go and snitch on me for? Like, I didn't make fun of you. Like, what is, Sister Virginia said, you said blah 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 blah." Well, that's not what she said. Somewhere along the line, and it was probably with me, there was a misunderstanding of what actually had transpired. And so the girl then went and complained to the principal, or to her mother, that night, that, I went to Sister Virginia for help, and then Sister Virginia called Matt down, and then Matt said Sister said this, and then the mother comes in the next morning, and she yells at the principal, and the principal pulls me out in the hallway, and she goes, "That's not what I said. That's not what happened." She explained to me how I misunderstood everything, and then it turned out that the girl had misunderstood what she thought I was doing. It had nothing to do with her. I was joking around with a friend of mine about something that wasn't even anybody in the room, and anyway. Then, so the principal says to me, "Go in there in your classroom, tell Miss Laudier," or no, it was Mrs. Stanler. "Tell Mrs. Stanler to write you a demerit for misrepresenting the principal." So, because I didn't know what the word meant, I felt like, my lawyer instincts kicked in, and I was like, I'm gonna get this demerit taken away because I don't know what misrepresent means, but I'm pretty sure I didn't do that. And so I'm in there, and she gives me the demerit. I go and I sit down. Class begins, and then, or the lesson resumes, I should say. And I raise my hand, and I said, "Miss Stanler, what does misrepresent mean?" And she says, "Look it up."
Exactly.
And I used to hate that because it was just a simple question. "Can you just please tell me what this means?" No, look it up. They always said, look it up. And guess what? That's what I do to this day. I don't know the answer. I don't sit there and go asking everybody in the neighborhood. I look it up.
That's like doing research.
Yeah.
Okay? With all the research, you follow the evidence. You might not have all the evidence. But one of the things with Civil War history in particular, well, there weren't 3 witnesses. If you're the only survivor, it's going to be difficult to find them.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have to base it on the merits of what people saw around it. You have to follow the evidence, and a lot of history is circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Because we weren't there.
Right.
If you can get convicted on circumstantial evidence, you can also write it in history and explain your conclusion.
And the other thing is, not everything is momentous.
No.
Right? Until someone down the road wonders, and then they go, well, what did his watch look like? And then everybody else goes, oh yeah, I wonder, yeah, that's a good question. And now we need to find out, what did his watch look like?
Exactly.
Did it have engravings on it? And then it becomes important. But at the time, no one around whoever this is I'm talking about said, the general wore this coat and that pants and everything, and his watch had an engraved eagle on. Nobody. I mean, maybe
Right,
they did. Some would have, but
ones.
yeah. But that wasn't something everybody did.
But when you think about it, you usually get in trouble for minor things that turn into big things. Like the old poem, for want of a nail, a shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, a horse was lost. For want of a horse, a battle was lost.
Yes.
In researching this, it's the little things that the men remember that are very consequential to them because it's very personal.
Yeah.
And they do remember distinct things. They really do. It's just hard it's hard for us to imagine because it's so much easier to write a global picture and tell somebody what a general was thinking. I never knew what my supervisor was thinking. I never knew what my principal was thinking. None of that.
I barely know what I'm thinking.
Right. That's enough trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know that we can do that. I think we can interpret part of it, but you got to explain it.
Yeah.
Well, he wrote that 20 years later, just to justify what was going on. Maybe not. You don't know that. Give him a break. I mean, I always tell people, if you've ever been in a traumatic incident, it might take you 20 to 30 years to even talk about it.
Yes. I know people like that.
I do too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it's I always just try to bring it back to my own life and my own way of thinking and being. And so if I hear something that sounds, insane or crazy or interesting or whatever from, the past or whatever, just a story that occurred with someone else, for someone else, or by someone else, or whatever, too, I'll have my initial reactions to it, but then eventually I'll sit and think about it, and I'm like, well, what would I do in that situation? Would I behave the same way? Would I do it differently? What would be important to me? What would I notice? And I can't imagine, as much as I try to, and I don't really want to ever know for sure, but I can't imagine what it's like to be in a battle, to have bullets flying all over the place.
Right. Or to be lying there, unable to see something, unsure of where the sounds are coming, and just waiting. I mean, I know from being a kid and being really scared at times, man, the monsters get really big.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And you feel really small, and you feel trapped almost. Like there's nowhere for you to run. Like you're stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
So, that's what often is missing in history.
Yeah.
They want to write a clinical history. They want to write a thesis, which is interesting because I don't enter with a thesis. And you say, well, he didn't have an axe to grind. No, I didn't. But, he didn't discover anything new. okay, fine. I wasn't trying to. But if something happened that way, I didn't think about that. Like I identified the skirmish line, the federal skirmish line in detail. No one to my knowledge had done it. Mm-hmm. But if they did, congratulations. But I did it the hard way. I took it.
You pieced it together.
Yeah, I took it from all the accounts. Do people really know what it's like to fire a black powder rifle or a pistol? Do they know anything about the ballistics of the thing? Do they know anything about the types of cartridges?
Right.
I mean, they had combustible cartridges.
Yeah.
Some.
Yeah.
The Enfield, 4 times a minute. Why? Because of the way it was made. The Enfield bullet. The mini ball,
Right.
So, those things play into account.
Sure.
The impact of it. I mean, 800 feet per second, that's the velocity of a .45 automatic. Mm-hmm. And I know guys who have seen guys get hit with them, and it's like, they're not going, oh, my shoulder. They're on the ground.
Yeah.
We don't think that way.
No.
They've never made a realistic Civil War movie because if they did, after the first 5 minutes, the audience would be leaving.
Yeah, turn it off. Well, they would probably think it was too cartoonish. They would think it was unrealistic because we're so used to it being sanitized.
Well, it would be like Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
Modern bullets sterilize the wound on the way through because of their velocity and all.
Right.
Civil War bullets didn't.
No, and that's the thing is, not that there weren't ghastly wounds in World War II, but it seems that the simplest World War II wound would be a little ghastlier in the Civil War with the ammunition they were using back then. Mm-hmm. I mean, in my imagination, I don't really know.
I mean, canister, a 12-pounder canister ball, size of a golf ball.
Yeah.
Lead, iron, or steel. The steel, clean, smooth wound. The rough iron one, jagged wound.
Yeah.
The lead one flattens out.
Right.
So get a golf ball made out of lead and flatten it with a sledgehammer and see how wide. I mean, we can't imagine it.
No, we can't.
And it's because we're tuned into all these Westerns where you always shoot the guy in the shoulder and he's still standing on his feet.
Yeah. Just the meaty part of the shoulder.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the meaty part of my shoulder that doesn't have bone behind it or some tendon.
That's exactly right.
So I don't know what meaty part of the shoulder John Wayne had, but he got shot on it a lot. And also the bicep.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're moving their arm like it's no big deal, picking something up with it.
But
and it's like, what?
You're the kind of guy that the bullet just went through. It actually hit his arm, missed the bone.
Yeah.
But his arm went, whoomp,
right.
and he couldn't even feel it.
Right.
So,
yeah. Hollywood is not the place to go for.
No. It's interesting, but an audience wouldn't be able to handle it.
No. But do you know what my goal is? To win one of those $500 million lottery jackpots and make that Civil War movie.
You see, that's what Two Appomattox was supposed to be.
Was it?
Yep.
Yeah.
And he couldn't get the funding because it wasn't in Hollywood.
Right, and exactly, and that's why I have to win the lottery, or my beloved Patreon subscribers would really just basically give me their life savings, and I will make that movie. And see, it's funny because I've become very much an anti-war person, but not in the like 60s radical kind of way where I want my country to go to hell and die, but more in a I love my fellow man kind of way, and I don't want to see my own people harmed in that way, and I don't want to see them do harm in that way to other people. Unfortunately, not everybody thinks like me in that regard, so we're going to have war forever.
Well, that's human nature. We're very dark.
We are awful, really, but right. And it took me 39 years to come to that way of thinking. I used to be very pro-war. I was pro the Iraq War, and I'm ashamed that I was now. But back then, I was still pissed about 9/11, so I wanted revenge on everybody.
The problem is you can't be ashamed of what happened if you had no hand in it. It happened.
Well, I had a
the
hand in
thing
it
is
in that
to
I
build
voted.
on that, to go away from that.
Yeah.
Siegfried Sassoon, the great British poet, wrote, "Pray that you may never know the hell where youth and laughter go." If you want to read reality, World War I is the first war that they really wrote about it on a massive scale
Right.
as it happened. All Quiet in the Western Front. Civil War battles, All Quiet in the Western Front on steroids.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we can't. It's something where they had to expunge the demons, and they never could. And the same with these veterans. The reason there's more written about the Civil War than almost any subject in history is because it massively affected the entire population.
Oh, yeah.
And the wounds from it weren't over just because the war ended.
Right.
I mean, when they held the 1913 reunion, I was told sometime that like 6 guys died of heart failure during the reunion. One of them I know was killed because the guy that did the killing was from Shepherdstown, and he stole the family car to go to the reunion. The family was going to put him in an asylum. And he was one of the rebels in that line that reenacted Pickett's charge. And he was shaking hands with a tall Yankee crossbow and recognized the fellow. It was the one that shot him after he surrendered. That Yankee died that night. And then the old man drove the car back to Shepherdstown and committed himself.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
So the war doesn't end.
No.
But the way we portray it,
Yeah.
we make it too simple.
Right. It was like the Lee surrenders and everybody's brothers again, and we all love each other, and we're like, hey, remember that battle? Yeah, we whipped you. Oh, yeah, ha, ha, ha. But it wasn't that way.
No.
It can't be that way. It'll never be that way.
One of Quantrell's men wrote about the war, later became a preacher. But he'd talk about it, and he said, well, we had a problem with that guy, that fellow. We took care of it, period.
Yeah.
That's all you heard.
Right.
And he knew what happened.
Oh, sure. It's like what's what Tony Soprano says. We took care of it. You know?
Yeah.
It's just that's what you do.
But you see, that's what it does.
And then you have, I'm sorry, you also have the people, the soldiers who died in battle or in service. The party may be over for them, but their widows live on. Their children live on without a father. Their siblings live on. Their parents live on having had to bury a child, which wasn't so uncommon back in those days, but still it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt.
The war was continued by the women of the South. They're the ones that helped spread the myth that there were no Yankees in the family.
Yeah.
But every Confederate state but one provided at least one white regiment to the Union Army.
Right.
With a number from that state, including Texas.
One white regiment or?
White.
White, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Northern Mississippi, was it? Barely seceded. You don't find monuments to loyalist Southerners.
No, you don't.
But the 7th Virginia was the 7th West Virginia after Antietam. They don't talk about the what were the scouts? The Jesse Scouts.
Yeah.
Loyal Confederates in Confederate uniforms riding behind the lines for Sheridan in the Valley.
Yep. Or prior to that, Milroy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They get written out because it's not the romantic thing, where the South won the war and Virginia was the main winner of it.
Yeah.
The Army out west was, that ragamuffin. But still, that mythology still continues. They assume that everyone in the South was a go-getter, Yahoo. But they forget about the mountain people in Appalachia who didn't want anything to do with either army.
Right. Yeah, they like to keep to themselves to this day.
It's so much more complicated than we are told.
Because life is complicated, and history is just the story of life. And I'm just as guilty of this as anybody else, but it only occurred to me in recent years that this oversimplification of history, is easy for people to digest, but we're fools if we think it really was that simple. And all we need to do for evidence of that is look at life in our own lives today. Look at the politics. Is anything black and white and cut and dry? No. It's very confusing, and it's all muddy, and it's disgusting. Look at your own life with, how your relationships work, or how your jobs work, or what you do in between those jobs and everything. All those answers are probably very similar when you ask, well, what was it like for, Custer when he was out of work, or, whoever it is. What did they do? And you probably imagine, well, it's Custer, so it was probably people were just saying, oh, you're out of work. Well, here, buddy, here's a bunch of money. And, because you're so wonderful, we need you to not fall into the poorhouse because you're Custer. But, that's probably not what happened. So I always try to do that with myself, and I think everybody should do that, is, every time you think that something is black and white, catch yourself and call yourself a simpleton, and then examine your own life. Examine the day you live in today.
Yeah, well, I always told my students that if you're not offended by history, you haven't learned it. I had a great-grandfather who told my grandma that he hauled cannonballs during the Civil War for the Union Army. Well, I looked up his record. Company D, 5th New York Heavies, made corporal in January '63 and hauled tail. He's deserted. So,
I had we had Bruce Boxleitner, the actor. So he was in town shooting a movie over the winter, and I was helping out, and I took him around the battlefield a couple times, and he wanted to see where the 8th Illinois Cavalry was because he had a relative who was in it. So I took him out there. We talked about them a little bit, and then I dropped him off, and that day I went looking for books on the 8th Illinois, and I found one, and so I got it for him. I actually got it off of Amazon. Nobody in town had it. And it came, and a couple days later, I brought it to him. And he was all excited, and he goes, oh, let's see if my ancestor is in here. So he looks up his name in the index. And sure enough, it's mentioned. And it goes to an appendix that has a list of the men in the unit at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. And there was his ancestor's name, and in parentheses next to it said deserted. So he was all excited, and then it turned out he was a deserter. But later, he knew more about him from family research and stuff, and records show that he did come back and served out and was honorably discharged. But for a period of time, he was listed as a deserter.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you got to be careful when you look into the. I got somebody who was in the Civil War. That's exciting, and then you find out he murdered a whole family or something like that. So you got to be careful.
I had a relative in World War II who joined the. He was Polish, but he joined the German mafia after the war. He shot his lieutenant. He was not a nice man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do they call that?
Fragging.
Fragging.
In Vietnam.
That's right. Yeah. Fragging.
Yeah.
Well, John, you have a new book coming out, I think you said,
I have
right?
a new one coming out. It's going to be part of the Savas Beatty Gettysburg series. It'll be a run of 700 initially that you can get, really nicely done. But it's called Strong Men of the Regiment Sobbed Like Children. The Destruction of Reynolds' First Corps on July 1st, 1863.
Nice. That's a great quote. Who's that from?
It came from an officer in the 104th New York writing home to his hometown paper.
Wow. Yeah. And that's true.
Yeah.
It is true.
Yeah.
Nobody's that strong.
No.
That's a not cry.
It's an interesting, I think it's going to turn out okay.
Yeah.
We're still in the editing process. So I'm hoping for July this year.
Oh, wow. Okay. So soon. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good luck with that. And I'm sorry, I called you John, but you said you like to be called Mike.
unless I'm in trouble, then
All right.
then I'll refer you to my brother.
Then I'll call you Mike. Then you're not in trouble as of now. But thank you very much for coming on the show, ladies and gentlemen. Don't forget, if you don't have his book, Stand to It and Give Them Hell: Gettysburg as the Soldiers Experienced It, from Cemetery Ridge to Little Round Top, July 2nd, 1863. If you don't have that, I'm sure you can get it on Amazon. You can get it all. Actually, I'm looking at the listing on Amazon now. I know you can, but of course, you know that if you go to For the Historian here in town, you get a 20% discount if you mention Addressing Gettysburg, and I have seen this book in there, so it is available. They can get it. They work with Savas Beatty all the time, and so that's and of course you could go directly to Savas Beatty, but get a discount for yourself and let them over For the Historian know that you listen to our show and you hear their ads and all that jazz. Otherwise, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. John Michael Priest, thank you very much for coming in. It was a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed it. And we'll have you back on when your first core book comes out. And that's it, folks. Take care of yourselves. See you next time. Hey, one more thing before we go. Did you know that you can now gift a membership to the Gettys Nerd in your family? That's right. You can gift them 1 to 12-month subscription and really help them learn more about the Battle of Gettysburg and the Civil War. So just go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg.